Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Total Health 2017. Today's presentation is called Magnetism, Magnetization, and EMF Effects. Our presenter will be Dr. Dean Bonlie. Dr. Bonlie is a graduate of the Loma Linda University, and he is the widely accepted expert on the effects of EMFs in the body. Today, his presentation will tell you more about how to manage this, and he also has a booth in the center which you're invited to visit after the presentation. So now I'm delighted to present Dr. Bonlie.
Good morning. Is this too loud or is it okay? It's good. Okay. This guy's going to live to 124, he said, so he needs to have his hearing equivalent to his age. I notice as I'm getting older, my hearing is getting poorer, but I'm only 80. How much are you? How old are you?
I'm 71.
71. Well, you got a ways to go. We'll talk a little bit about aging and longevity and magnetism. I'm going to rush through the first part, the miracles of magnetism, and get into the chelation and the EMFs. So you can be patient with me, those who have heard the first part. The second part, two parts are new. Uh-oh. The miracle can magnetism extend longevity and quality of life? Well, we wondered about that at the beginning because it seems that in times past, the animals lived excessively long time, and according to the Bible records, they lived a very long time. So we thought we'd find out deep. As you know, the Earth's magnetic field has been depleting at the rate of about 5% per 100 years. And if you go back a million years, well, that leaves us with not much. So that's where this comes from. See, in the beginning of the 80s, there was 5 countries of the world that got together and said, we're going to find out what the effects of magnetism are on the human body and on life. So they drilled down, cored down in the alluvial fans of major rivers of the earth, came up and found that the rivers had only been flowing for 9,000 years, and approximately. And interesting enough, every time they could measure the amount of magnetism at any good time by measuring the alignment of the magnetite crystals in the core. And when they had a reversal, as they call it, of the magnetic field, that's when everything died. 9 geological ages and 9 die-offs. So that got me quite interested in this whole subject. Now, if you think about it, why do we need magnetism? What's going on? We're going to learn that in this first section of the lecture today. Now, Valerie Hunt read the same articles that I did on these studies, and so she said, well, let's find out what it does. So she had the physics department make a mu gauge, as it says there, 7 by 7 by 7, blanks out all magnetic fields. She put 2 young students in there, and she had them all wired up so she could find out what was going on physiologically in their body. Guess what? They began to cry in the first few minutes. He says, what's wrong with you guys? He says, we feel like we're falling apart. And so she said, well, let's see what happens. So she left them there for a few more minutes, and pretty soon they had no feeling in their feet. They couldn't even move their legs. And next thing happened, the heart monitor started going off, that the heart was in great distress. I talked to her about that experiment, and she said if I had left them in there another hour, they'd been dead. With that dependent on the Earth's magnetic field to keep us alive. Isn't that amazing? Nobody ever taught you that, did they? So I thought, well, at what point do we run out of magnetism and get to the point where it becomes critical? So I made a cage. It was only 2 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot, and I put young mice in there, what you'd call adolescent mice. And they were jumping around in there. And now this cage, we had eliminated 80% of the Earth's magnetic field. Guess what happened to them? They all went into slow motion. You could reach into the cage and turn them over and they could hardly get up. In 24 hours, one of them died. The rest of them doubled their food intake, trying to get energy from the food. But they lived, but they became extremely obese, just like little round balls. And this is one of the reasons today for obesity is lack of energy. People are subconsciously trying to get energy from their food. So, well, this is interesting. Let's see what it does for longevity. So I had Dr. Gumiel, who was in charge of Project Genesis for the World Health Organization. I sent him a magnetic pad because he was studying longevity. And it was 10 times the Earth's magnetic field, and he put it under a cage, 23 different kinds of insects. Then he had another cage in the other room, away from the magnetism, same insects, same types and everything. Guess what? Insects live 5 times longer. So if you're trying to get rid of insects, magnetism doesn't help you any. So he called me up all excited, and I said, well, how about humans? Maybe that just works for insects. So I said, let's make a human tissue experiment. So he went to work and made a really elaborate experiment with tissue cells, human tissue cells. And they had oxygen and nutrition and everything continuously. And those cells lived 2.5 times longer than the control group that wasn't in the 10 times Earth's magnetic field. So do you want to live 2.5 times longer? Well, that might help. Now, you should consider, though, all the bad things that's happening to us, so that changes. We have EMFs, we have pollution, we have all those sort of things, so you probably won't make it 2.5 times longer. Norm Shealy, I don't know if some of you know him, he's quite well known, he's the neurosurgeon. He said, well, I wonder what happens to free radicals, maybe that's the reason. So he took 6 of my pads and put them under 6 women, and he found that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the day after the night they slept on the magnetic pad, they had 80% less free radicals in their bloodstream. Now, free radicals is what ages you. So this is probably the answer why those insects and why those human tissue cells were living longer. I thought, well, let's see what happens. So I did a study here. Maybe some of you are in it. And we just tried people for 20 minutes on a 40 times Earth magnetic field. And the average reduction was 5.6 reduction in free radicals. Those with less than 4 fillings had 9% reduction in free radicals. So it doesn't take long for you to knock off the free radicals. It was 104 people in that study. Now we'll go on, that has to do with longevity. Now we'll go on to what most of you are going to die from, and that's cardiovascular disease. And I was lecturing on this in California, and Dr. Edwards came to me and he says, I got to have an interesting experiment for you. I have 2 patients that I've been chelating with IV chelation. and they have angina, very extreme, and I can't heal them from that. So I said, well, let's try it out with magnetism. Now, he was having these patients evaluated at UCLA Medical Cardiac Center, actually, and they'd go in with the angioscope, go up and check the plaque in there, in the coronary arteries. He found that, first of all, in 2 months, they no longer had angina. In 8 months, they had reduced the plaque in their arteries by 80%. So we went on and enlarged that study to 14. Same results, but we used DMSA, which is more effective, and we had them cleaned out completely in 6 months. So you can actually remove the plaque out of the arteries of people so that they don't die of cardiovascular disease or stroke. Pretty good news, isn't it? So simple, you just go to bed at night and take 5 little pills, which is 500 milligrams of DMSA. We're going to learn how that works here in the next lecture. There was these 3 studies done, all showing that fibromyalgia responded well, reduced the pain. These are all university studies, by the way. 2 6-month double-blind randomized placebo-controlled studies are now complete using 6,000 times the Earth magnetic field on a 13-inch target area of these 80 patients for 120 to 140 hours. The first and 80-subject nerve regeneration study on diabetic neuropathy showed a 13% increase in nerve conduction and a 32% reduction in pain. The second study, an 80-subject low back pain study, showed a 52% reduction in pain and a 37% improvement in quality of life. That's significant. And that study is going to the FDA to get this device here that you're looking at approved for. That's a 10,000-pound electromagnet, but it's DC, so it's just like the Earth magnetic field, no frequencies whatsoever. We found if there was any frequencies in the area that was very strong, we couldn't get healing. Now we've done 15 congestive heart failure patients showing significant improvement in 12 out of the 15 patients, with a 20 to 100% increase in ejection fraction with 2 to 3 weeks MME treatment, 10 to 12 hours a day. They just slept in the machine overnight, that big machine you just saw. Now, why would you, what do you think's going on here? We're going to learn. We're actually making new heart cells. So we went on to doing research. In the next section, you're going to learn what we've done at Johns Hopkins University. We've proven that we make new cells. Isn't that nice? Now, down in the middle of your brain, in the ventricles, you have, on lining them, you have lots and lots of stem cells, just dividing and dividing and dividing, but they go to waste because there's not enough nutrition and oxygen for them to migrate out to the periphery of the brain and make new brain. And the same thing, you have there's a lot of stem cells in your heart. And if you have good enough nutrition, enough oxygen, a lot of those will keep replacing the dead heart cells. But let's talk about how this works. There's a formula in physics called the Lamar formula. And it simply says, if you increase the magnetic field, you will increase the velocity of the orbiting electrons to a higher orbital energy state of valence electrons, which would enhance electron transfer. It's called the Lamar formula. I discovered this, first of all, I was just treating people with a complementary to the Earth magnetic field, but then when I had to figure out what was actually going on. And he gave a lecture, and it was on the internet, and everybody came down on me and said, "Oh, you're crazy, that can't be." But the formula says that it enhances electron transfer, which is the basis of all chemistry. And one day I got a phone call, and the guy on the other end of the voice had a German brogue, and he says, "Are you Dr. Bonlie?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Why are you calling me?" He says, "I'm calling to congratulate you. We've been studying your work and your theories, and we totally agree with you here at the U.S. Cold Fusion Foundation." Actually, it was a foundation. And I said, "Well, that's great." So we talked for a while, and I said, "Now, why did you call me?" He said, "We thought we'd be the first to congratulate you." But he says, "We want a favor. We have a couple of very important people high up and that have cancer. We think that you can heal them." And he says, "Oh," I said, "Okay. And you just send your super bed to these two people, and we'll see what happens." Fortunately for me, they got well. And so the government has basically left me alone until this year. Now they're beginning to hound me. See, we got a new group in. And now I'm going to talk about what we did at Johns Hopkins University. I made a little baby MME for them so they could put it in the incubator. And they were testing plates, Petri dishes of different kinds of tissues. And what I'm going to talk about next is going to be what they found with a 2,500 Gauss magnetic field on human tissue cells. They found an upregulation and downregulation of genes expression in over 2,000 genes. Now that's amazing in itself, because this is the basis that tells your whole body what to do. Stem cell proliferation. It means these are the cells that replace the bad cells. This is nothing short of amazing. Matter of fact, they were all excited and wanted to get the government to finance some bigger studies. The government said, "This is too far out. We don't do things like that." They were very disappointed. That was the U.S. government. This is presented, now they've written a couple articles on it. Now, how do you enhance the Earth magnetic field in the Northern Hemisphere? The field must come from the sky and into the Earth. It will be the opposite in the Southern Hemisphere. Matter of fact, we learned that the hard way. We sent magnetic pads down to Australia, and then people called up the next day and said, "These things are killing us." I said, "Turn them over." And they turned them over, and they worked great. So, why does that? Because in the first 3 hours of sleep, you produce most of your human growth hormone, which makes your cells divide. And when they divide in the Northern Hemisphere, they're going to have a magnetic field coming from the sky and going into the Earth. So the new cells have this magnetic field going through them, and so the atoms in those new cells are going to have their valence electrons going counterclockwise, because if they were going clockwise, they'd be going against the magnetic field. And so the little atoms flip over so that it's going the right way. Now, that's very important, because the Lamar formula says that if you reverse the magnetic field in which the cells divided, you'll actually slow down the valence electrons and stop chemical reactions. So you can speed them up or you can slow them down on your relationship to the magnetic field. Now, the Earth magnetic field is so weak now that it isn't very pronounced. But if you're sleeping one way and then go from your back to your stomach and back and forth, you're not getting near as good a sleep as you would get otherwise. So remember that whether on a magnetic bed or not. Don't flip. You can go from side to side, and from back to side, or from front to side, but not 180 degrees. If you don't have a magnetic bed, sleeping with your head to the north is better for you. You'll get more benefit out of the Earth magnetic field. It takes about 2.5 months to reorientate the body cells, because that's how long it takes for all the cells to divide and get reorientated to a new magnetic field. And I've spent a lot of time in the South Seas, in Australia, and that was true. If I stayed more than a month, I was really run down. And if you stay longer, for 2.5 months, then you pick up again. Then you come back here and it goes through the whole thing all over again. Now, most magnetic products sold today are bipolar, meaning both directions of fields are present, setting off an emergency response similar to acupuncture. So you can put a little magnet right here on your hand and get the same hormonal response as you get from acupuncture. We're going to show you that. See, a bipolar pearl increases blood flow and increases electrical flow from the brain. That's a good thing. But the bad effects then, it drains the vitality with overuse, diverts electrical flow from other areas of the body that may need it worse. So you're playing God with the brain and forcing it to do something that it doesn't want to do. It's trying to divide out the energy to different places and trying to keep some in reserve so you won't go into shock when you have an accident. Dr. Saul List wanted to know what it did in the blood, so he took a little 3/4 inch magnet and put it right there and wanted to see what the hormonal effects would be. And this is what they were. It's amazing. Just from that little tiny magnet on the hand, he got a 45% increase in beta endorphins. That's the body's natural heroin, okay? Or opium, whatever you want to call it. It's beta endorphins. 45% increase, so that reduces the pain. 24% increase in serotonin, which is the feel-good hormone. 15% increase in ACTH, which is the precursor to adrenaline. So you get all these things just from a little magnet on the hand.
At which point, sir?
It only takes about 2 minutes.
Which part of the hand?
Oh, on the whole cue point right there.
Here?
Yeah.
Thank you.
But you can do that almost anywhere in the body. Anyhow, all this indicated emergency response. And why the emergency response? Because you had a bipolar field. The magnet, well, even though you had the right side going in, magnetic flex lines have to come back around. So all in an aura all around it was a reverse field. So it's a bipolar field. And whenever you expose the body to a bipolar field, you get an emergency response. And people feel better, so they think it's good. The more you use it, though, the worse it is for you. At first, you feel good. As a matter of fact, in a big study we did at University of Virginia, comparing our magnetic pad with the Nikon bed, which they did, and they found at first the people did really good on the Nikon bed, but in 6 months they were worse off than they were to begin with. Whereas ours, the people got better and better. So that was proven independently. See, a unidirectional field can be engineered, and that's what we've done by using block magnets and putting them so close together they act like one big magnet. So the reverse field is outside of the bed or outside of the body. And so you can have a unidirectional field like the Earth. Now, the bad news is the Earth magnetic field is still going down. It's going faster now. It's 7% per 100 years. And NASA says that within 800 years, we'll be down to 0. And life will be difficult here on this life. Everybody will be sleeping on magnetic pads to keep living. Now, live longer and healthier with an enhanced Earth-type magnetic field. Use bipolar magnetic fields for short-term treatment only. Realize the great potential in powerful unidirectional magnetic fields. Now, with that, we're going to go on to magnochelation. extreme toxic symptoms, 2 hours in the treatment with MME. MME is the 3,500 Gauss magnetic field. When we treated MS and Parkinson's, these people got really sick 2 hours in because we were dumping so much toxic metals into their bloodstream. We didn't know what was going on, but it was working for other things, but why not for these two things? Well, that's a characteristic. MS and Parkinson, these people are loaded with mercury usually. So this had a neurologist from the University of North Carolina was doing this study. And I said, well, put some 500 milligrams of DMSA in them and see what happens. So that's what he did. He took 500 milligrams of DMSA and gave it to him, and the symptoms all went away. So we went to the IRB that oversees this and said, look, we need, anytime we're treating these two diseases, we need to take 500 milligrams of DMSA every 6 hours. We never had a problem afterwards. But then when we made our magnetic bed stronger at 40 times Earth magnetic field, some of the people had the same problem. So we make them take 500 milligrams of DMSA and they have no problem. Because the DMSA, the reason it works, explain. How does it work? It is necessary to raise the charge on the cell wall to draw the metals out of the cell, and except when cellular division is taking place. Non-toxic metals exit the cell at very low voltage of only 40, 50 millivolts. So what do? It takes 80 to 100 millivolt differential to remove the toxic metals. The mitochondria must make an optimal amount of ATP to run the sodium-potassium pump at a very high level to get the necessary 100 millivolts. Before, we used high doses of vitamin C and alpha-lipoic acid and Q10 to help the mitochondria, resulting in some success, but not much. So all we had to do was give them 500 milligrams of DMSA. Symptoms disappeared. People that are really, really toxic, sometimes we have to wake up in the middle of the night and give them another 500 milligrams, but they don't have any symptoms, toxicity. Now, you say, well, why is this so important? There's a lot of people telling you that they chelate you with IV chelation, EDTA, and DMPS. They're not getting it out of the brain. They're getting it out of the heart, and that's a good thing. But not much, because we've chelated a lot of people after they've been chelated with IV chelation, EDTA, and DMPS, and all of a sudden their urine samples show a huge amount of mercury coming out and lead. But EDTA does not bind with mercury. DMPS does. And if they're giving DMPS with it, they're getting rid of some of the mercury. So neither one of these two things cross the blood-brain barrier. And so they're not getting it out, even though they're getting out of the heart, and that's a great thing. But they're not getting it out of the brain. And with the magnetic pad, you can clean the brain out, and that's a big deal. Why? Because Parkinson's, MS, Alzheimer's, all been identified as being caused by toxic metals. Now, how do you get those metals in there? All it takes is, if you have 5 fillings and you're chewing anything, you're in a toxic state, your blood is a toxic state of mercury toxicity. And so if you're under stress, the brain cells as well as the heart cells, then they aren't making enough ATP to keep the charge on the cell wall up enough. And so the emergency mechanism of the body is to open up the calcium channels and bring in calcium and magnesium. That's what it's supposed to do. But if you have toxic metals there, they go in too. But you can't get them out unless you're over 80 to 100 millivolt differential. And that's where the magnetic pad comes in. You can actually charge that cell up to the point where it'll actually excrete those toxic metals. And we've proven that over and over again. remember I said something about we gave Johns Hopkins a little mini magnetic thing, which they tested. In the tissue plates, they increased the production of ATP by 54%. It's a big deal. Yeah, 54. See, ATP is the currency of energy in the body. It is the catalyst for most of the chemical reactions in the body. Catalyst mean a helper, you know. Okay? So if you can make more ATP, then you're going to have better chemistry throughout the whole body. Increased ATP means increased sodium-potassium function, which leads to charge in the cell wall going up, and the metal comes out. Once the charge is strong enough inside the cell, positive charge, it pushes the other positive charges out, which are the metals. We wanted to see how well we could do this with humans, so Dr. Al Johnson in Dallas said he'd do a study. They took 13 healthy subjects, took them off all seafood and fish for 5 days before baseline studies were done. They collected their urine overnight, sent it to doctor's data. So then we had a baseline of what these people are normally excreting. The next night, we put them on the magnetic bed and collected the urine overnight. Following day, which is on the third day, we had them sleep on the magnetic pad again, but gave them 500 milligrams of DMSA. Here's what happened on the second night on the magnetic pad. They had a 22% increase in lead, 28% increase in, you can see it there, 28% increase in mercury excretion, just from being on the magnetic pad. And this stuff was still circulating and not coming out because the kidneys try to conserve metals. And so we weren't getting half of what could come out. So the next night when we give them the DMSA, this is what happened. 45% increase in mercury and 80% increase in lead coming out in the urine, simply because it was bound with sulfur, which is, DMSA is primarily methylated sulfur. Kidneys by nature conserve metals as some are needed, but not the toxic ones. Kidneys will excrete sulfides easily as they are considered toxic. So binding the toxic metals with a compound that easily gives up sulfur. This keeps the toxic metals leveled in the bloodstream low, preventing recontamination of other tissues. This talks about what we talked about, how we came upon this, which I already talked about. That's the strong magnetic field that Larry Pierce was using on MS and DMSA and Parkinson's. Here's some studies that were done, and we don't have a lot of time, but these are Johns Hopkins studies that they published. And what's interesting about these are that they found an upregulation, downregulation on 2,000 genes, which we already talked about, using the static magnetic field. It's an interesting statement. Ultimately, a full oligodendrocyte formation can be promoted in vivo by static magnetic fields without concomitant astrocyte enhancement. This capability could lead to non-invasive therapies for conditions such as multiple sclerosis linked to oligodendrocyte pathologies. Indeed, we have found this to be true in our clinical studies. We've treated 100 multiple sclerosis cases, with 75 out of 100 showing substantial improvement, some of them getting completely well. There's another thing they wrote, and again, they talk about treating Parkinson's disease and other neurologic disorders. This is another one. They say they could be treating Alzheimer's disease and Huntington's disease. Now, many of these patients had Lyme's disease, which manifests many of the same symptoms. So the non-responders could have had large percentages of Lyme's disease, which would not respond to this type of treatment. As mentioned in the last study, Alzheimer's could be affected by this treatment. Indeed, we did do 19 cases, 14 improved substantially and 5 did not. We also treated independently 29 cases with magnetization in 2 pilot studies of autism. Again, with astounding results. All children improved just using the magnetic pad and chelation. Now, the 5 patients that didn't improve in the Alzheimer's study, we think actually we didn't use DMSA. This is the first cases. And if we'd used DMSA, then they would have improved too. At this point, I'm going to tell you a little bit brain regeneration. When I was lecturing in Chicago, a doctor came up to me and says, I got a story to tell you. He says, last time you were here, I bought your demo bed, which I'm demonstrating up here. And he said, this is the story. My daughter, who is a chiropractor, 31 years old, went to Jamaica on a vacation. She came back and she started going downhill. I said, I took her to all the specialists here in town and nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. So 6 months later, she's in the hospital on a respirator, unconscious. And they said, well, you might as well pull the plug on her because, there's no hope of her recovery. He said, no, I want another MRI of her brain because they'd taken one right at the beginning. To their amazement, she had holes all over her brain, some of them as big as that. And they said, what's going on here? Does she have mad cow disease? He says, no, I don't think so. Just do a needle biopsy of her brain, which they did. And of course, she had parasites, and those caused those holes. She'd eaten uncooked pork, or not properly cooked pork. And that's something that there's a lot of pork disease down in Jamaica. So anyhow, they gave her the proper antidote for those parasites, and she recovered to the point where she could breathe on her own. So they said, you might as well take her home and hire a nurse. So they took her home, put her on the demo bed that he had. 6 months later, she's back practicing chiropractic. This, her physicians couldn't believe, the neurologists in particular. And so he says, let's do another MRI of her brain. Guess what? Those holes are all filled in with new brain. That's in a 40 times Earth magnetic field. So you can regenerate tissue just with a proper magnetic field. So with that, we'll go to EMFs. That's probably why you came. What are EMFs? Electromagnetic fields. When you have an electromagnetic field, it has a frequency. Unless it's produced by a DC current. It can actually be, if it's pure enough DC, it can be just a straight line, no frequency. But everything we have around us today has a frequency. They're coming from the cell phone towers, they're coming from your hydro, from your lights, from your appliances. All these things are putting out EMFs.
Are those all alternating currents? Is that what?
That's right. But you can have actually radio frequencies such from your cell phone towers, which isn't alternating currents. That's a radio frequency. But again, it's going like this. Matter of fact, they're transmitting most of your telephone conversations now by frequencies, I should say, but they're actually not like the old telephone line. They actually have microwaves that they're sending out the signal with microwaves from one city to the next and one part of town to the next. So you're getting microwaved, you're getting high frequencies, radio frequencies from the radio towers and all of these things. Anyhow, by the way, we found if there was a radio tower close to where we were running those big machines, those 10,000 pounds DC magnets, we couldn't get any healing. because it was interfering with the brain's message to the tissue, telling it what to do, and that's what we need to get into.
Same thing is true with the electric wiring also.
Electric wiring has it too. What did I do wrong here? There, let's go the right way here. Did you ever stop to think what makes the difference in cell types in your body when you are repairing for injury? See, you cut your finger, you'll make blood vessels, you'll make muscles, you'll make skin, all these different cell types. And what tells that finger to heal like that?
DNA?
Your brain is in control. Pretty neat, huh? You have up here that's telling your tissues what to do on a minute by minute and second by second basis. Dr. Becker discovered these instructions were traveling from the brain to the body via the Schwann cells that are on the outer layer of the motor and sensory nerves. Those Schwann cells are the cells that we thought they were just ligaments that held the myelin sheath on, which is the insulation on the nerves. But they had a much more important function, and that is transmitting the messages from the brain to the tissue. And those messages actually are just part of it. They also have resonance frequencies for each tissue. And each tissue of your body has a different resonance frequency. So you actually are resonating maybe your liver this moment, next moment maybe your leg or your digestive system. So it's continually changing frequencies depending on the needs of the biofeedback. We're going to talk about that. And these cells are semiconducting so they can get the electricity through very easily. And the carrier frequency for them is the resonance frequency. This is the same message system as what we call biofeedback. But in biofeedback, the message is going from the cells to the brain, telling what it needs for repair and health. The Chinese call it meridians. This part of the electrical message system goes through the fascia, which is also semiconducting. Now, Dr. Becker figured this out, and he got a grant from NIH to map out these currents going back to the brain. He found 60 meridians, and he reported that to the NIH, and they cut off his money. So we don't believe in stuff like that. So here we have electricity flowing out on the motor and sensory nerves, resonating the tissue and telling the tissue what to do. And then that electricity flows back through the fascia, up the spinal cord, up to the brain, telling the brain what needs to be resonated next and what needs to be repaired next, and repaired with what kind of cells to make. Pretty amazing system, isn't it? You're fearfully and wonderfully made, I can tell you that. Now, you go in and you have surgery. In order to get it, usually what they're going after, take the knife and cut through your fascia, get down to the internal organs. The body puts a scar tissue on that fascia. Scar tissue blocks that electrical flow of the meridians, telling the brain what you need. So the more surgery you have, the more medical problems you're going to have, because the message isn't getting through to the brain to tell the brain what is needed. Avoid surgery at all costs, but if it's necessary for life, you better do it. So this is the story, how it works. Oh, this is the wrong way. Now, because the electrical system is very low voltage, weak signal is easily affected by stronger EMFs. So if you have the voltage on the EMF coming in that are stronger than the signal from the brain, and then you don't get the message through. What does that do? It garbles the message back and forth, and uh-oh, lights out. You get disease and sickness and death. Why are EMFs so important? Because we're getting bathed in more and more of them every minute. And how do you prevent them? I didn't know what to do at first. And I was lecturing to the American College of Toxicology. And I listened to their lectures and everything. And I said, you know what we can do? Maybe we can solve this. So I took several of their electrical sensitive patients. These are people that couldn't be around any electricity or anything. And I put them on the magnetic bed, and guess what? They got well. They were no longer sensitive to anything. So we cured electrical sensitivity. What was going on here? It's very simple. We were enhancing the function of the astrocyte cells in the brain, which make the electricity for the body. They are what determines the voltage at which you're sending out that signal, telling your cells what to do. So if you have the stronger message is the one that wins. It's like when you're in a room and you have music playing, somebody talks to you, well, you hear them, and you don't pay any attention to the music. It's just background music. It's the same thing here. You have then a stronger signal coming from the brain to the tissues, so the other just becomes background noise. So you can cure electrical sensitivity. And you can get a better night's sleep because, again, you're putting a higher voltage, you're resonating the tissues. That's the purpose of sleep, by the way, is to repair your body and to resonate the different tissues. So you go through different frequencies, which are the resonance frequencies of the different tissues of your body all night long. You start out at 7 hertz and go all the way down below 1 hertz and back up again. All of these are resonance frequencies of the different tissues of your body. That's the purpose of sleep. Sleep is so important. Now, if you have that signal enhanced because you've enhanced the cells that make the electricity to make the signal, then you're going to get a better night's sleep. As a matter of fact, I've had 4 doctors sitting at my booth this was in the States. I was at a medical show, and they said, you're selling these things for the wrong reason. I said, why? He said, you should be selling them for sleep enhancing, because we have found that we can do just fine on 5 or 6 hours of sleep when it took 8 hours before. Why? Because we're charging them up faster, because we're enhancing the function of the astrocyte cells. Okay, we're time for questions right now.
The lady who had her brain regenerated, now because the brain has different functions and everything, what about memories and like she did lose something as far as?
According to her doctor father, she had all of that back.
Wow.
This goes back to the holograph idea that you have a holograph which tells the cells what to divide into. I thought it was rather amazing because I would have guessed that she wouldn't have any.
Can you comment about pulse magnetic field versus EC magnetic field? Pulse versus pulse?
Well, all your power, all of these things we're talking about, they are alternating, okay? With the exception of DC, and that's in that big 10,000-pound electromagnet that had a terrible time getting pure DC. Because if there was any frequency, it didn't heal, because it interfered with the bodies.
In terms of product, there are people selling pulse electromagnetic field
I'm not getting the question. Anybody else get the question?
PEMF, post-electromagnetic field therapy.
Oh, you're asking about PMFs. Yeah, they work on a temporary basis, and there was over 100 studies done in Europe on this, and they found that if you used them more than 15 minutes a day, they become counterproductive. You see, all they're doing is creating an artificial emergency because it's putting in a frequency, same frequency for too long, and it's not one of the natural frequencies that through biofeedback the brain needs. And so it becomes an irritant. And so the benefit you're getting is from the emergency response effect. It's like the bipolar field. They're good. We have them in our clinics. I had 8 clinics. And we use them as a little, shall we say, get started thing. And they're useful, but should be only used for very short periods of time.
So you're charging up at night for 5 to 6 hours on the mat. Does that take you through the whole day?
Depends on the amount of stress you're under, because you burn up the electricity much faster under stress.
So how do you just, I guess you wouldn't know for sure how much you needed, you just maybe take a nap at lunch on one.
That's a good idea. Actually, usually you can get by, but you'll get tired and want to go to bed if you run out of energy. We call it energy or vitality. And when you run low, most people keep pushing themselves with coffee or something to keep going, and so they're running on adrenaline, not on electricity.
So if you have a mat and then you also have, like, we have a Wi-Fi from one of the lasers we bought here, and it's supposed to neutralize the EMFs. Do you know anything about?
Unfortunately, they don't.
They don't. Okay.
Somewhat. It's based on the, what we call the MOSFET thing, okay, or diode, and they can knock off below the line. In other words, but you're still getting the frequency coming through. And we've tested these at the University of Calgary, and they actually amplified.
A patient who has a fractured spine and has subsequent bone spurs that are blocking the signal from the brain to the rest of the body.
That's a problem.
That surgery.
It's not, yeah. That's a hard one. And a lot of people suffer from a lot of calcium deposits on their spine. And, but again, what do we do for it? We put them in that large device and it dissolves the calcium.
My brother has a big calcium thing on his neck. So one of those
Yeah.
guys would take it down?
Yeah, it takes a lot of time because it's slow dissolving, okay?
Have you got any specific examples of Alzheimer's patients?
We have a lot of them.
A real story.
A story about Alzheimer's? Well, the most dramatic one was 2 ladies and a man brought in this lady, and she was just saying the same sentence over and over again, over and over again. And I said, well, let's see what it'll do. So we put her in the large device, the 10,000-pound device. She was in there for a couple hours, and she stopped talking, saying the same thing over and over again. We were worried. And then pretty soon she says, "Where are we going for lunch?" So, it's some pretty dramatic results. Again, that's a metal toxicity problem in the brain, and we have to give them a lot of DMSA to bind the metals as they come out, and so they don't recontaminate the body.
Excuse me, in the case of the lady that had the worms from the pigs, the brain, you said there were holes. Were they like a Gruyere cheese holes, or were they just the viruses or whatever they were, the worms were sort of,
They were actually holes. It looked like Swiss cheese.
okay.
Can you tell a little bit more about DMS? So which form should be taken? But I think in Canada it's not easy to
Yeah, you get it from DMSA Synergy in New York. And stop by the booth there, and I'll give you a phone number. DMSA Synergy.
What's your booth number?
205. Back there, you're with the hand up.
My husband had surgery on a C3 and C4. He had spinal stenosis, and that was fine. It was straight fine. Now it's gone above. It's kind of all deteriorated. They say he can't do it anymore. His feet are numb. His hands are numb. And he's got no strength. And anything. Do you think the magnetic bed would do anything?
I would, if he came to my office, I would put him on the strongest magnetic bed, and I would put a strong neodymium magnet right there on that spot. And better than 50% of the time, you'll get relief. It stops the pain, and you'll get remodeling of the bone. But the best thing for him to do is to go to one of my clinics, which have a much more powerful magnetic field. But it's going to take a lot of time because of the calcium deposits.
What is your bed made of?
Ceramic magnets, and they're embedded in foam, polyfoam. We cut holes in the polyfoam, and they put each magnet in a hole, and we put them so close together they act like one big magnet.
Different from the nickel beds?
Pardon?
Is it different from the beacon beds?
And there's no comparison.
How is it?
Oh, they put little tiny magnets like that in there, and so it makes a whole bipolar field. And that's what I talked about, the study that was done at the University of Virginia. Because they're bipolar, they set off an emergency response, and the people felt better at first. But 6 months later, they were worse off than they were before.
I had a friend with fibromyalgia, he's using that, and he said it was the same thing.
Pardon?
For a while, he had fibromyalgia.
Yeah.
For a while, it was like, I don't see any difference.
Yeah, well, they used up the vitality. Okay.
So your magnets, are they all positive on the top?
No, all negative.
I beg your pardon?
All negative on the top.
All negative.
All negative on the top, and when I send them to south of the equator, they're all positive.
Okay, thank you. I missed that part.
We sell them all over the world.
My friend's husband developed peripheral neuropathy, and after one chemo treatment, like very severe.
And that's one of the treatments, by the way, for peripheral neuropathy.
So you're getting lots of positive results.
Yeah, well, that gets more complicated. We got to close this because we don't want to take the next speaker's time.